She stepped onto the stage, wearing a janitor's uniform, her name stitched plainly across the chest, a quiet reminder that she didn't belong here. At least, not in their eyes. They weren't expecting much. Some were already preparing their laughs. The polished Steinway reflected the figure of a woman they only knew by the mop she carried. And then, she placed her hands on the keys. 3 notes. That's all it took. The entire room froze. Not because of the sound, but because, in that instant, they realized they hadn't just underestimated a woman they had dismissed a past, a gift, and a quiet dignity they were never refined enough to recognize. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a reckoning, a wake-up call to every eye that ever glanced past another human being as if they were invisible. And a reminder that true brilliance doesn't wait to be welcomed. It arrives without permission. Morning at Houston State Conservatory began like any other, with piano notes slipping from behind soundproof doors. Chopin, Liszt, Debussy, played again and again like silent prayers from students clinging to the dream of becoming someone. Down marble-lined hallways, warm yellow lights shimmered off the polished floors, reflecting every hurried step. And somewhere in that symphony of ambition was a sound no one really heard: the low rumble of cleaning cartwheels. A large woman in a faded brown uniform pushed it steadily down the corridor, her presence as quiet as dust. Clarice Hampton, age 42, custodian. Invisible. No one asked her name. No one remembered her face. Only the color of her clothes. She passed practice room 7. A student inside stumbled through Rachmaninoff off-tempo, hands tense. Clarice paused half a second. The student's right hand was locked tight at the wrist. Clarice almost knocked. Almost said, "Relax your wrist, just a little." But like always, she said nothing. A faculty member walked by, glanced her way. Not a student. Not a guest. Just Clarice, the woman who mops the floors. They kept walking. Clarice lowered her eyes. Moved on. Noon. The principal entered the main hall, preparing to welcome the city's scholarship board, the people who controlled next year's funding. Every chair must be 1 inch apart. Exactly 1 inch. Understood. Her voice was calm but crushing. "Yes, Mrs. Morgan," Clarice replied. She knelt to adjust each chair, using the measuring tape from her uniform pocket. Sweat trickled down her neck, her knees ached. But her hands remained precise, as if still practicing scales. Nearby, piano instructor Ms. Ellis walked past. Her voice just loud enough for Clarice to hear. "I saw a janitor near the recital stage last time. We should remind them to use the back corridor." A few students chuckled. Clarice said nothing, didn't look up, just nudged one misaligned chair back into place like the last thread of order in a world she no longer belonged to, but still refused to let unravel. Afternoon, the 3rd floor, solo performance wing, reserved for the best. Clarice was assigned to clean it. The small recital stage was empty, no students, no instructors, no cameras. The grand piano stood silently under dim lights. Waiting. Clarice took off her gloves, sat down. Her fingers hovered, then touched the A key. Soft. Almost as if she was asking the world, "Do you still hear me?" Then F. Then E flat. A fragment of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, Nummer 2. Not the whole thing. Just a few bars. But it was enough to know she didn't just remember the piece. She had lived in it. Then footsteps. Approaching. Clarice flinched, rose from the bench, slipped her gloves back on, returned to her cart. She wiped the piano clean, wiped exactly where her fingers had danced, as if scrubbing away evidence that once she had been someone else. 6 p.m. A young faculty member rushed from the main office, pale-faced. "There's been an accident," he whispered to the logistics coordinator. The student soloist, for tonight's gala car crash. No one else knows the list piece. In a corner of the hall, Clarice was straightening chairs. She froze, didn't speak, just stood tall, and looked toward the stage doors, where the Steinway waited for someone. Someone they had never imagined could be her. The atmosphere in the main hall shifted abruptly from formal to frantic. The Steinway Grand still sat there, majestic and silent, but now the entire auditorium buzzed with whispers about Olivia, the gala's student soloist, getting into a car accident. Someone said a fractured wrist. Another whispered, possible concussion. No one dared confirm it, but everyone knew she wouldn't be playing tonight. Artistic director Rebecca Morgan had gone pale. Major donors, scholarship board members, and even a few arts journalists were already in the audience. The program brochures had been printed. A banner behind the stage read, "List, Hungarian Rhapsody, Number 2, performed by Olivia Ross." But now there was no Olivia. In a far-off corner, Clarice Hampton stood by her cleaning cart, gloves still on. She'd heard every word. She asked no questions. She said nothing. She just looked at the stage, a space that had once been a dream, then a memory, and finally, a forbidden zone. But under her apron, her right hand began to tap a rhythm against the metal cart. F C G B flat, an opening phrase she had practiced 14 years ago. The youngest piano instructor, Michael Evans, was the only one who greeted her each morning. Today, he was the one who quietly stepped toward the organizers and said, "I've heard Clarice play that piece before." Victoria Morgan looked up. "Who, the custodian?" He replied plainly. "She played the list once after hours, when no one else was around. And it didn't sound like someone who knows how to play. It sounded like a professional." A second of silence. Then laughter broke from senior instructor Ellis. "Are you suggesting we let a janitor replace the gala soloist, Michael? I hope you're just distressed." "No," he said. "I'm serious." Clarice knew they were pointing. She didn't need to turn around to feel the mix of suspicion and ridicule behind her. She stood beside her mop cart, the only place they ever allowed her to belong. Victoria Morgan approached, heels clacking against marble like a ticking clock. "Is it true?" she asked. "You know how to play the Hungarian Rhapsody?" Clarice turned to face her, her expression calm, her hands steady, but her eyes, for the first time in years, looked straight ahead. "Yes." Ellis stepped closer, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. "And you think with bleach-stained clothes and hands that just scrubbed the floor. You can sit at that Steinway, the one reserved for the chosen, and play," Clarice replied slowly. "I don't think. I know I can." The silence that followed was lead-heavy. Then Victoria turned to Richard, director of the Jefferson Foundation, the man who held the purse strings. She whispered just loud enough for Clarice to hear, "Should we try it? We could spin it as a human moment. Say, it honors diversity. If she's bad, we call it a symbolic act. If she's passable, we look compassionate." Richard gave a small nod, his gaze not on Clarice, but on the overall scene, like a director setting the stage for an unscripted act. Clarice didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. But for the first time that day, she brought her hands out from beneath her apron, removed her gloves, and said, "If I play seriously. Not to be your backdrop. Not so you can applaud your own kindness." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "You can refuse. But if you do, we'll have to restructure our support staff. You understand budget constraints, I'm sure." Clarice knew that tone. She'd heard it before as a law student, when black women were pushed off debate panels, when scholarships vanished due to funding. She removed the name tag from her uniform. It read Clarice, backstage support. She placed it on a nearby table, slowly, as if stepping out of a role she'd been forced to play for far too long. Then she looked straight at Victoria and said, "I'll play, but not because you gave me permission. I'll play. So you remember your mistake with every note." The Steinway sat center stage, still waiting. No one laughed anymore, and a woman just stepped out from behind her mop bucket, not as a substitute, but as someone they were about to remember by her first name. The main hall slowly sank into silence as Victoria Morgan stepped up to the microphone, her platinum hair stiff, caught off guard by the moment. Her smile was forced, one of those smiles people wear when turning an accident into an inspirational opportunity. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out over the sound system. "Due to unforeseen health issues, tonight's featured performer is unable to play. But, in the spirit of community, we invite you to welcome a very special substitute, a member of our own team, someone most of you know by her quiet, tireless service." From the back rows, a few chuckles. An older woman leaned over and whispered, "A janitor playing piano. Is this a PR stunt?" Victoria pressed on, her voice thick like burnt syrup. "Please welcome Ms. Clarice Hampton." Clarice stepped out from the wings. No gown, no makeup, no fanfare. Just a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and soft-soled shoes that made no sound. Her hair tied back simply, not for style, but survival. And on her chest, no name tag. She walked slowly across the long stage. The spotlight caught every step, making her skin blend into the hardwood like ink on parchment. Behind her stood the Steinway Grand, the pride of the conservatory. Its lid already lifted, its shine still echoing the hands that had polished it for years, hands that had wiped away its dust but never been allowed to touch it with dignity. Clarice sat. The audience murmured. Someone nudged a friend. "She's really going to play on stage." Clarice bowed her head. No wave, no nod, nothing. Just closed her eyes. And behind the darkness of her lids, she returned to a small house on the outskirts of New Orleans. To her grandmother, Althea Hampton, an aging symphony pianist with fingers twisted by arthritis, who taught her how to glide over keys, how to hear the sob behind a note. "Music isn't for proving anything," Grandma Althea once told her. "It's how you let people know you're still alive, even when you've lost the words." Clarice opened her eyes. Her fingers dropped onto the first key, A-flat. No hesitation, no tremble. Liszt, Hungarian Rhapsody, Number 2, sliced through the air like a blade drawn from its sheath. Not the sound of someone giving it a shot, not the hesitant touch of a hobbyist. This was the sound of an artist exiled and returning, uninvited, unapologetic, unafraid. The first 30 seconds passed before the room could even grasp what was happening. By second 40, silence. In the front row, a retired conductor leaned forward. In the third row, a distinguished donor dabbed the corner of her eye. In the back, Ellis, the instructor who had mocked her, clenched her fingers until her knuckles turned white. Clarice didn't roar, didn't perform tricks. She simply told her life story through tempo, through phrasing, through the pressure of every key change. The joyful passages sang of a childhood not yet erased. The mournful lines echoed the heartbeat the night her grandmother died. And the final section, violent, unrelenting, sounded like silence finally being ripped open. Backstage, Michael Evans watched, eyes locked on her fingers. He knew the crowd was witnessing a performance, but he saw a woman reclaiming her name. Clarice struck the final chord, a flawless, full-hand arpeggio, sharp as steel. She didn't stand. She rested her hands on her thighs and gave a slight bow. The room stayed still. No applause. Not yet. 3 breaths passed. Then one person rose. Applause broke from the left balcony. Then the right. Then the center, a cascade. No more laughter. No more dismissive glances. No more denial. She had just taught them note by note that dignity is not stitched into uniforms or printed on name tags. Clarice stood, bowed a second time, not in gratitude, but in farewell to the role they had written for her, and the silence they once expected her to stay in. The applause stretched on as if the audience was trying to make up for all the years they hadn't heard her. But Clarice didn't need their redemption. She stood still on stage, the spotlight glowing against her plain white shirt, and at last her name was spoken, not printed on a smudged name tag, but echoed in the hush of an entire room. "What's your name?" a man's voice called from the front row. His tone carried weight. David Chen, artistic director of the Jefferson Foundation, and the man who controlled the entire conservatory's funding. Clarice lifted her head slowly. "Clarice Hampton," she said. "I was accepted to Juilliard 20 years ago." A ripple of whispers cut through the rows like static. "Juilliard," David frowned. "Why didn't you attend?" Clarice reached into her pocket and pulled out an old piece of paper, a faded photocopy of her acceptance letter. The Juilliard logo was still there. Barely. She held it up, saying nothing, then lowered it. Her voice steady. "My grandmother, the one who taught me to play when I was 4, had a stroke the same week I got the letter. I chose to stay. By the time she passed, I had the skills, but no scholarship, no money, no time." Stage right. Professor Ellis was no longer smiling. She tried to maintain composure, but her eyes were lost. Clarice turned toward her, not bitter, not cruel, just one look, the kind of look that judges without needing a verdict. "You said once," Clarice recalled, "that I should stay away from the performance area and stick to my role." Clarice Ellis began, trying to explain. Clarice raised a hand not to interrupt, but to end the entitlement to that conversation once and for all. "I did stick to my role," she said. "I kept the conservatory clean. I kept the Steinway polished. I kept the halls quiet so your students could dream without tripping over trash or noise." She paused, her breath calm, like giving a lecture. "I never asked anyone for a chance, because I knew if I have to ask to be respected, then it's not respect, it's charity. And I don't live on charity." Victoria Morgan, who minutes ago had been orchestrating the evening, stood frozen at stage left. The woman who once measured every chair to perfection could no longer control the night she thought she had written. Victoria stepped out, forcing a smile. "We really thank you, Clarice. This was such an inspiring moment. Our foundation always values stories like this." Clarice looked at her. A silence stretched longer than it should. "No, Mrs. Morgan," she replied, her voice soft but sharp as glass. "I'm not your story. I'm not your campaign highlight. I'm not your unexpected community outreach win. I'm not your exception to prove the system works." The room went still. No applause now, because they knew they were being named, even if no name was spoken. David Chen stepped forward. His voice was steadier than anyone who had stood there that night. "Clarice, we're launching a new initiative, Music Within Reach, to bring classical music into communities that have no access. We don't need just a musician. We need someone who understands why people walk away from music and still choose to come back." Clarice looked at him. "This isn't a casting call," he added. "We want you, your name, your story, all of it." Clarice didn't nod. She didn't refuse. She just smiled softly. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who had finally wiped the last layer of dust off the mirror that held her name. 3 months after the recital night, the second-floor hallway of Houston Conservatory still echoed with piano notes, but this time, not from the soundproof rooms of elite students. The music came from Practice Room 3, now the heart of a new project, Music Within Reach. Coordinator Clarice Hampton. She entered carrying a stack of sheet music. Her white shirt just as simple as the one she wore that night, but instead of a mop. She held a key. A key not just to a classroom, but to a space built on self-worth and belief. Inside, 8 students waited. None wore conservatory uniforms. None had portfolios for international competitions. One wore torn sneakers. Another looked at the piano like it was a foreign object. Some had been rejected from other programs for lack of background. Clarice stood among them, no podium, no microphone. She just sat beside the piano bench and tapped 2 quiet notes. "My grandmother," she said, "used to say music wasn't about conquering the world. It was how you reminded yourself you were still whole, even when the world tried to make you feel otherwise." A brown-skinned girl named Marissa whispered, "Did you really get into Juilliard?" Clarice smiled. "I was accepted, but life doesn't always follow the score you write." "So what did you do?" Clarice looked at them, those young faces not yet used to stage lights, but intimately familiar with the stare of being underestimated. "I kept playing. In laundry rooms. In tiny apartments. After long shifts. Because music doesn't need permission to exist. And it doesn't need a certificate to reach people." Outside the classroom, Victoria Morgan walked past. She didn't say anything, just glanced in through the glass. Clarice lifted her head and nodded. Victoria nodded back. No apology, no reconciliation. Just one thing, a nod of recognition. A quiet kind of respect. Late but real.